Welcome, Caltech alumni and friends, to today's conversation with Caltech's 2021 Distinguished Alumna, Dr. Barbara Berger. Your host today, I'm Sandra Tsing Loh, a fellow or sister Caltech alumna, BS in physics, 83, Page House, don't throw stones, it's fine. And also to the great shock of my own late father, Eugene Loh, MS in physics 53, PhD in mechanical engineering 54. I was named a Caltech Distinguished Alumna in 2001. But now to today's show. Quick moment of housekeeping. This is a very fast moving hour with three parts. First, President Dr. Thomas Rosenbaum will give his introduction to Dr. Barbara Berger. Then Barbara and I will have a discussion around 30 minutes. And then around 12:40 or so, Barbara will take your questions, thanks to those who've already submitted, and there's some great ones. If during this live session you have questions yourself, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You're all techers. That should be easy to do. Please include your affiliation with Caltech when submitting your question. Today's conversation, we should say, will be recorded and made available online following the event. And now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome Thomas Rosenbaum, Caltech's president.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you all for joining us today. Caltech's Distinguished Alumni Award is the highest honor the Institute bestows upon a graduate. It was initiated in 1966 to recognize the outstanding achievements of our alumni, whose leadership in fundamental discovery, technological innovation, and societal impact exemplifies the essence of their Caltech training. The Institute's contributions to the world emanate in large part from the accomplishments of its graduates. And today, we celebrate the work and vision of Caltech Chemistry PhD and 2021 Distinguished Alumna, Barbara Berger. Dr. Berger joined Chevron as a research chemist in the company's Richmond laboratory in 1987. After fulfilling several technical assignments, she assumed a number of key management positions within the company, ranging from international marketing to chemicals, technology marketing, and lubricants. She has served as Chevron's vice president of base oils, vice president of the global supply chain, and vice president of Chevron's operations in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In 2013, Dr. Berger became president of Houston-based Chevron Technology Ventures, the longest operating corporate venture capital firm in the oil and gas industry. Since then, she has identified new technologies and business opportunities that have the potential to strengthen Chevron's business now and for the future. Over the course of her career, Dr. Berger has been a powerful advocate for diversity and inclusion in the sciences and in the oil and gas industry. She has a particular interest in encouraging women to enter and succeed in male-dominated professions. Her Caltech philanthropy fits this mold, with an endowed fellowship to support women doctoral students in chemistry who are interested in building careers outside academia, as well as an annual prize for women in chemistry. Like Caltech itself, Dr. Berger thinks carefully about and embraces the power of making choices. As Chevron's president of technology ventures for the last 8 years, it is her responsibility to weigh alternatives that will shape the future of her company and the oil and gas industry as a whole. She recounted her own realization about this dynamic in a recent interview. Quote, "I did something that I would always recommend that people coming up in the industry or any industry do. I went to the Chevron selection team and asked, 'Why did you pick me?' The answer from a couple of the selection team members was really interesting. They said, 'You know how to say both yes and no.' And wow, I don't know if they know how profound that was, because if you think about the world of innovation, you think about what we do in the ventures business. It's a volume thing. There are so many opportunities and so many good opportunities. And it is both what we say yes to and what we say no to that defines the impact that we will have externally as well as internally." Today, we honor Dr. Berger for her important and impactful career as a business leader at Chevron, spanning roles in science and engineering, marketing, and investment, her contributions to advancements in renewable energy, and for her prominent role as a mentor and advocate for women in science and industry. It is now my honor to turn the podium back to another Caltech Distinguished Alumni Awardee, the incomparable Sandra Tsing Loh.
Thank you so much, President Rosenbaum. I was told I could call you Tom, but for a former Caltecher, it's too scary. Welcome, Barbara. It's great to see you.
Hey, thank you very much, and I appreciate that introduction by President Rosenbaum.
Yeah. So Barbara, if I may call you that, you are and have been many things. So you're head of Chevron Technology Ventures. You're an Energy Council's top female influencer, Leadership Council member for Activate Global. But you've also, because I've watched your video on the internet, you've also described yourself almost as importantly in your career as a middle child. So can you give to gain some insight into this aspect of your science journey, can you give us a snapshot of what your family home was like growing up?
Sure, Sandra. And first of all, I just want to thank Caltech, first of all, for being part of my life for since probably 1982 is when we started our relationship, so almost 40 years ago. And for this honor, it's quite humbling. So a middle child. So I was born in the Northeast in upstate New York, and I'm one of six. And middle of six means there's a couple of us in the middle. But I describe myself that way. First of all, there were large families were not that unusual in those days. So it's not like there weren't other families on the block that had a number of kids. But I think a couple of things that I remember from that time. First of all, there were a lot of times I didn't have my own stuff, and I had a bunch of hand-me-downs, and I was frequently called other names than Barbara, and they happened to be my siblings' names, so I got used to just kind of answering to anything I did. But I think a couple of other things about growing up in a large family, and I've really appreciated that large family now as my parents have aged, and the six of us are really returning some of the favors that my parents gave us early in life. Despite the fact that there were six of us, my parents really let us explore our own journey. So if you looked at my sisters in particular, you would see that we look alike. I can tell you we have traveled different roads, and mom and dad kind of supported that. So, I think it's a balance of being part of a team and also being an individual. But those are a few things from growing up. I would say the other thing is that we were encouraged and supported in our education. And for me, I've always been an athlete, and I've always loved music, and I'm not exactly sure where the athlete came from, but I know the music came from my parents, and particularly from my dad, who kind of got me involved with one of those things in the background when I was very, very small, as well as my siblings also were involved in music.
So now, and you're a bit of a pioneer being a woman in science, because those were still relatively early days for women studying science. Now you go to the University of Rochester, and you have not one but two academic passions, chemistry and history. So can you tell us what inspired you about both these two fields?
Sure. So I think at the time they seemed unrelated, and maybe during the interview we'll find out that there's so much that comes together relative to the two of them, at least as I play out, my journey. So chemistry was about problem solving. It was, it was about a fact-based world, a research and investigation world. And as I think about history, at top of the list was I love to read. I'm thinking reading chemistry textbooks wasn't exactly what I was thinking about with reading. And so, but I think history and history of the world and the way the world progressed was interesting to me at that age, even though I was I hadn't traveled a lot of places, I had just read about them. And so my history and my reading was a way that I started to learn about the world. I was able to actually see some things in person as I aged.
So now, okay, now you come to, I guess it's 1982, and you arrive on the shores of the Caltech campus, if you will. So there are many alumni watching, and I think our paths crossed because I actually graduated in 83. So at this time, I will say, historically, the male-female ratio at Caltech was 7-1. As they would say to the women, there was that saying, Caltech, where the odds are good, but the goods are odd. We can't hear a drum, Phil, on Zoom. But for you, arriving at Caltech in 82, what was that like for you socially?
Well, first of all, I arrived in 83, but I started thinking about Caltech in 82. So I just to clarify, a couple of things. How did I get from Rochester to Caltech? I think that's worth just saying. So I decided to go to graduate school in chemistry, and I had some ideas about where it was going to go from there. But there were a number of connections between Rochester and Caltech. My research advisor at Rochester is just a dear man. He had been Harry Gray's first student. And then the professor down in the basement at Rochester had been a graduate student at Caltech, and they told me about Caltech. So, the power of having some personal connections was important. Also, it was in Southern California, and I don't know if you know where Rochester, New York is, but it's in the Northeast. And so I also wanted to explore, and I wanted to go outside of the world that I had spent the first 22 years in. So anyway, I applied, I came and visited. There were palm trees and the sun was shining, so don't get that in Rochester too much. And I got accepted, and I made my plans to come. And I interned in St. Louis. So if you look at a map of the US, St. Louis is dead center, and it's also pretty much dead center between Rochester and Pasadena. So I'm a very practical person, and I was going to be driving. That was my first actually opportunity to work in industry, because I didn't come from a family where people had spent a lot of time in industry. But I arrived at Caltech, and and a couple of things that I would say, and I just was recounting this with one of my friends that was there with me. So I think the campus had gone co-ed in the decade prior to us. I don't know how much we really understood that or dwelled on that. There weren't very many of us. It was a bit like, I was going to say Animal House, but in the way I would describe it is the behaviors and kind of some of the things that were done probably wouldn't stand muster today, but we were included everything. We were not excluded. And I personally think that was really good training ground for a career in a male dominated industry. Was I got a chance to be in an environment where I was one of the exceptions. The other things I would say about Caltech, and I think it probably still holds, first of all, it's a very high touch place. It's small, it's personable. There is, while you're working with these just absolutely distinguished scientists, faculty members, there's not great hierarchy. So you get to know people as people, which I think was really important to me. Even when visiting scientists came on, they were introduced to us in their first name. We spent time, we went out to dinner, we got to know them as people. And in terms of a place to go and go to graduate school, it's a pretty nice environment to really focus for 4 years on learning, and that's what I did.
So now you graduate, and in 1987 you joined Chevron as a research chemist, and Chevron, where, if you said you've been there over half of your adult life, which is unusual but interesting because you've played so many roles in that company. And as we heard in President Rosenbaum's introduction, in 2013 Chevron tapped you to head Chevron Technology Ventures, and he cited that great quote where, you know, you ask them, why did you pick me? And they said, your ability to say yes and no at the same time. I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit. And I'm curious, as might be many people watching, future graduates as well, is there something that scientists can learn about the art of leadership as well?
So thanks. Actually, I've been with Chevron over half my life, not just my adult life. So I've been there a long time, a lot of different roles. Started as a research chemist, kind of knew early on that I was going to evolve from there. And I have had some insights in my interview that that you could, you know, kind of do that. So I moved out of the lab fairly early on and progressed. And as you mentioned, in 2013 came and was asked to run the Tech Ventures company. You know, the interesting thing about Tech Ventures, and I've been able to really grow that organization and shape it for a really important thing, which is how do we marry the innovation that is happening to address the challenges in energy with an incumbent company. And I would call Chevron an incumbent company, you know, 140 years old, very large base business, but, you know, it's certainly both an imperative as well as a desire to be a large company in the future. So, you know, thinking through how do you introduce change, which is, you know, innovation and new technologies, it's all about change. How do you introduce that into a company that really focuses on execution? I think a couple of things I would say is, you know, the job allows me to do something that I think I've probably been training for a long time, which is I'm known as somebody that, you know, has technical chops. So I'm not, you know, I am not a deep scientist. You know, I was trained by some of the best, but I can work my way to understand a wide variety of technologies. I think where how I marry that and what I look for in some of my best employees is, and I understand how you can turn that into a business. Because if you don't turn it into a business, its ability to be sustainable in the business world, you know, is quite fleeting. And so I think the combination of both technical and commercial skills is really important. But back to the yes and no, you know, there are a lot of opportunities, whether it's what we put inside of our pipeline and consider for investment or trial or so forth, and the paths you take in life. And it is thinking through what are you going to say no to and what are you going to say yes to? So having criteria and being decisive. You know, I've thought a lot about that. I've shared with, you know, a lot of employees as well as just people seeking career advice is, you know, once you get out of school, the number of paths you can take is quite large, and it can be overwhelming or it can be very empowering. And hopefully I've been able to, with my own organization as well as myself, is actually turn it away from overwhelming to empowering and be able to progress the mission that we have.
And you've famously said that you actually enjoy hearing pitches. For you, it's fun and interesting. And I know so many people watching would go, what do you look for? What makes you say yes to you know, a project that your sector would get behind?
So we'll hear pitches from both you know, startups, entrepreneurs, innovators, as well as from my own employees. And you know, with my own employees, because they can progress a lot of different things, the three questions I ask them or to frame their arguments are, you know, is there something here? So like you do all the homework to make sure that there's something here that can be a change and a change for good, right? You don't want to be a disruptor for bad, you know, you want to be a disruptor for some positive benefit. And, the second one, and I would say is, I work for Chevron. So I would say, so why should Chevron care about this? And I frame it that way because we can care about things for a wide variety of reasons. We can care about it because we see a use today and we want to introduce it into our operations. We can see potentially a use tomorrow. We can see that it is going to be important in the energy system and we want to understand more about it. Maybe it looks like a threat. And so we need to understand it and either find the opportunity in it, negotiate around a threat, but for whatever reason, make the case that this is important and that Chevron should care about it. And the last thing is the work I do involves collaboration. So back to that, the skills I maybe learned as a middle child. And we collaborate with startup companies, but also other investors. And so can we get a deal done and can we work with the company, with the other investors? And so, frame your arguments around those things. Now we do a lot of due diligence, obviously. We don't make just yes and no based on that, but that's, that's kind of the framework of an argument. But the other piece that I really like about pitches is it takes courage to stand up and put your ideas on the mat. And, I guess, am known to be pretty supportive of and acknowledging that it's really easy to just stand on the sidelines. But when you really put it out there and put it, and make your ideas and be as convincing as you can, your passion comes out and everything. That's just exciting. The energy radiates from whoever it is that's talking. And I like to be around people like that.
So, and your story is so interesting. And I think that from the outside in, when people look at tech innovation, they might think of people just at a lab bench making something, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems like you really live a very well-rounded life in Houston. You are associated with the symphony there. You are an athlete. Your team is that way as well. And you have traveled from that kid in the living room, not always being called Barbara, and not going and reading about things, to really being a global citizen. And I think that's, some people may be, and you're interested in a lot of things, including history. I mean, and is that something surprising about people who work in tech innovation, how well-rounded you are, maybe defying some stereotypes?
I don't know. I find most people are a little more well-rounded than you give them credit for. I mean, I've always had a lot of interest. And it probably my parents are like that too. We tend to try to label people. And I sort of defy labels. I don't know. I obviously tend to also be around people that have a lot of interest. So, the one thing I would tell you that, I went to kindergarten and here I am, but when I left Caltech, other than getting an MBA from Berkeley, I ceased to become a formal student and I entered the workplace and stuff. And despite the fact that I work way too many hours, you do have a lot of other time and resources in your life to pursue lots of other interests. And I did, right? And they all kind of tie together. So if I think about, the travel, the energy industry is global. The more I have learned about the energy industry and the history of the energy industry, it has been central to civilization and growth and everything. And so those interests kind of tied together. I'm a people person, and so I enjoy the symphony because it's a different organization than the ones I spend my working days doing. But you have musicians trying to be the best they are, working together as a team. So there's a lot of parallels to how I just think about organizations and the way we go about our lives. So I've been very fortunate that I have a lot of interests, and I've been also very fortunate that I've been able to pursue them.
And we're not going to make you play the piano now. I promised you we wouldn't do that. Okay. So now to the piece that we'll call the future of energy. Caltech alumni, as you know, very smart. A lot of really fascinating questions have been submitted. Even now, I see Tom Tsao, I see Wayne Miller asking about, the future of energy. Also, I just wanted to say Ted Jenkins, shout out, who wonders if you ever came across Harry Sigworth or Chuck Auerbach. That we can talk about that in a moment. But and the questions have ranged. They've been very technical sometimes, from either a direct conversion of CO2 to hydrocarbon liquid, or the new EVOR, if that's called geothermal loop technology, et cetera, et cetera. So we've said you could lead a whole separate seminar, 10 hours on energy. But can you just tell us how you see the future of energy and Chevron's role in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Sure. And I do appreciate all those questions. And again, we could go down a lot of rabbit trails on the specific technologies that people asked. And, they reflect a fact that the energy system is huge. And if you include all the generation and the consumption, it's all of us, right? Try doing anything without energy. And, there's a number of challenges in the energy industry, which is why I think it's a really fascinating place to work. They are challenges that matter. There were a number of questions around climate change, and that's a really important topic that, regardless of whether you're a generator or consumer, being knowledgeable about what, the effects of CO2 emissions and other emissions on the climate's really important. The expectations for energy, first, that it's accessible. Now, most of us don't have to worry about that, but 1 billion people in the world do. That it's affordable, and again, most of us don't worry about that, but every once in a while there's a price spike, and it reminds us that it's reliable. And many of us have seen examples where it hasn't been reliable, and then frankly that it needs to be lower carbon and lower impact on the environment, not only carbon but water and land, etc. And solving all of those for a system that's that big is no small undertaking. And so, if I think about my own company, which is an incumbent company, so every day we produce products for our customers. We've got to run our current business, make it reliable and affordable. We've got to decarbonize oil and gas, and we also need to grow new businesses. Now, some of the lower carbon businesses have scaled, and we've made tremendous progress in the US in the last 20 years as the cost of solar and wind have come down. And so we've been able to decarbonize the grid. But there's still a long way to go on that. And getting that last percentage points on the grid will not be easy. I think all of us understand about the intermittency of renewables, and so different forms of energy or energy storage to make that happen. But there's a lot of other aspects of the economy where electrification is not going to be so easy. And so that's really the areas that Chevron has focused more on is where will molecules continue to be, begin to continue to be the main actor. And one of them is a promising hydrogen business, but there isn't a scaled hydrogen business. So we see an opportunity to help build a business like that. But we've got to do all of these things while we're still delivering today. While technology is really important, it's not the only game. The scale of this means that infrastructure is so important. Policy, because when we put new technologies in place, they frequently do not match the economics of the existing. And so how do we incentivize both the supply, but also the demand of new energy? And ensuring that we do this transition or these changes without having huge impacts and particularly negative impacts to the workforce to society to communities. And so it's a front and center topic at the international, at the global level, certainly at the federal level, state, local. It's going to take all solutions. And for anyone who's a current student or thinking about where, how their career progresses, the challenges of energy are important and they're big, and we need absolutely the best talent in a lot of different disciplines to help sort this out.
And that's great. A segue to my next question in a way, your own science journey at Caltech is coming full circle with the Barbara J. Berger Endowed Scholarship established in 2012 in order to support students pursuing degrees in the natural sciences. And you've recently pledged over $1.5 million to Caltech's Breakthrough Campaign. Thank you, to support the next generation of women chemists. You've said there's a passion that you have around encouraging women to enter and succeed in professions previously dominated by men, and actually to all young scientists. Can you talk a little bit about the passion that you have for mentoring the next generation of scientists and what you would want to give them? I mean, particularly, Caltech at the 80s versus 2021, certainly a different field. Can you talk a little bit about your passion of mentoring?
Sure. And education is the ultimate door opener. It was for me. And I had some really good reinforcement when I was a kid. My grandmother, she got a master's in chemistry and math in 1923. So in my family, it was, it was expected and it was reinforced, and there were great role models and stuff. But it is the ultimate door opener, and I have benefited tremendously from Rochester and then Caltech and then Berkeley. So how can I not want to help the people that come behind me? Besides, they are the future of our world. And when I'm sitting in a rocking chair with a blanket over my legs, I hope that we have, we have trained and educated, the next generation, the next two generations. And so, I've been able to help at different levels and undergraduates and so forth. But at Caltech, and when I was talking to the administration and thinking about how could I help, because you always want to help in a fairly surgical way, something that really will make an impact, and also something that impacts you and makes a difference to you. Again, that yes and no kind of decision making. I probably didn't phrase it too politically correct when I started, but I wanted to help people that weren't going to go into academia, and it wasn't a shun on academics. Obviously, I am the product of the great academics in this country, but I also didn't believe that academics would get all the bright minds, that we have all these challenges in the world, and that they should be able to go into different parts of society. So I kind of started there. And I guess the second piece was that I knew by the time I went to Caltech that I didn't really want to go into academia. And it wasn't that I didn't like to teach, because I actually really enjoy that and the mentorship and stuff, but I actually didn't want to do academic research. I'm a very practical person. I need to see things deployed. And so I kind of went on my own journey, and I landed, right? And I was, very successful in job search, when I was finishing up at Caltech. But I also know that was a hard journey, and I did it myself for the most part. And so why couldn't we help these people that have invested a ton of time, learning and honing how they learn, and help them find their way? Now, Sandra, you're a great example. As I've met more and more alum, I mean, they've gone into all walks of life from Caltech, and they've done amazing things. And when you ask them, so how did you get from here to there? Their answers are kind of cryptic. Like they're never a straight line. And so I thought, would it be possible for me to help that group? Because one of the things was to give them the confidence that, man, you can do anything you want. You just got to figure out what you want to do. And if we can help you with some of the connections and some of the early work, you'll be on your way. And then you'll come back and help the next bit. So that was the idea for that. It's the only fellowship or sponsorship that I have targeted women. And okay, I'm a woman, and I do remember not being one of many. But when I look at my company, I look at the profession that I'm in, energy venture capital, there still are not a lot of women. Now there's an intersection of a number of different disciplines to get into that. And how do you get more women in? You get more women, right? And so I also wanted to encourage women to, and support their, their education and then their career. And to be honest, Caltech has already made the big yeses and nos, and they've filtered on a very strong set of candidates. So I just had to put some icing on the cake.
So to go, we have so many great questions. So I think I'm gonna turn Arthur Lee says, good to see you in the webinar. And this question is, who was the most inspirational person to you in your Caltech days?
So Arthur Lee works for Chevron, but he's also a Caltech grad. So Arthur, that's very nice. So I can't tell you just one person at Caltech because there's probably like 5 on the call and they'll be like, how come she didn't say my name? So I'm going to go with the safe one, that even when I was at Caltech, the most inspirational person in my life was my grandmother. Because so that's safe. And she, as I mentioned, she got her master's in 1923, never allowed by the men in her life to have a job. And she didn't really let that stop her. So she was a role model and just a fantastic grandmother for a little girl like me to have. So sorry, I punted on that one, Arthur.
Good. Okay. Another question here. I think I'm going to turn to John. This came to us at, and I'll say the Caltech PhD 94 electrical engineering, currently employed at TRW, CAA member since 2018. What would you say are, and if there are only 3, are the 3 most important lessons learned in life after Caltech?
John, it's a great question. And the fact that you've only allowed me to do 3. So learning doesn't stop. And what I learned at Caltech was really how to learn. I've used that a little bit to get a job or 2 by just saying, well, I got a PhD in from Caltech, so I obviously must know how to learn. But seriously, is learning how to learn. The world has changed so much. The second one would be that the world has changed. I've been gone for 34 years. The world changed. I changed. And so, keeping dynamic and so forth. And then after I left Caltech, I got a job. And so I guess the other thing I learned was just the whole aspect of the working public. And I'll just give you, one anecdote was that when I started working at Chevron, I was a supervisor. I've always been a supervisor. And I had people that worked for me that were my dad's age. And my dad helped me out a lot that summer. But, your career is long. And so I think one of the things that I have learned is to work with people of lots of different ages and how important that is. It is not cycles through. You learn from the young, you learn from the old, and you teach the young and the old. So I think the age diversity or intergenerational diversity has been something that I have learned a lot about. You don't learn so much about that when you're a student. And I continue to believe that that is one of the most wonderful things about working for a company is the different ages and the melting pot that we are. Great question.
Let's see, this comes from Ariane, a BS in 2011, chemistry, Blacker, previous SURF participant. And the question is, and it's a big one, maybe, what do we still need to learn about integrating scientific exploration and technology development for innovation?
So if I understand it, let me take a stab. And when I think about it is, how do you go from idea to impact? And that's a really important one in the world that I live in, right? Because you see a problem or an opportunity, and scientists, technologists, engineers start working on that. But until you can scale that, until you can translate it into something that someone will pay you for, you can't make that, you cannot have that impact. So I spend a lot of time, they call them the valleys of death, between the work that goes on in academics, the work that goes on in a national lab, and then how we go to actually prove that it would scale. I think we've made tremendous progress. Some of the things that help, obviously, are funding, training, the marriage of scientists with entrepreneurs or business-related folks that can understand the business model for things. But as we take on the challenges I talked about in energy, we need more and more of work to facilitate and accelerate the work from what many of you have done and the work that's happening at Caltech now to something that actually can be deployed and the world can benefit from.
Just another question here. This one is from Tom Tsao, who I think I mentioned earlier. Can you talk about what have been some of your Chevron's biggest investment successes? Or do you have any favorites, we would even say?
So I'll talk about tech ventures, right? Because obviously Chevron invests in a very different way, but tech ventures is focused on innovation that can help our base businesses, as President Rosenbaum said, or in the future. I'll just give you, I won't say favorites because that's like, parent with child, but I'll tell you about a few of them so you'll get the range of types of companies that we invest in. And I'll start with Ever because somebody asked a question about Ever. So thank you for whoever brought that one up. It's next generation geothermal. So it's using techniques rather than for oil and gas extraction, but for heat and electricity production. Geothermal aims to solve the problem about how do you have dispatchable, zero carbon electricity generation on the grid that is not intermittent like solar and wind. So that would be one. Let me go to, we were an investor in ChargePoint, so that's pretty different. And that's not, there's underlying technology. It's an electric vehicle charging infrastructure company, and it has just recently gone public. And we invested in it mainly to understand something, a little bit different than technology, but how does money get made in electric vehicle charging? And we know how money gets made in gasoline and retail sales. And, the store owner, they make money on gasoline. They also make money on everything you buy inside the store. And there's a model around that. But what's the model around the electric vehicle charging? Because ultimately, Chevron has investors, they expect a return. So we were very interested in that. And where do people charge? When do they charge? And so forth. So, and maybe the third one I'll talk about is a digital company, a company called Seek. And again, there's so many of these, but I'll just bring up Seek, S-E-E-Q. A couple of things about this. Our industry and many industries generate data, time series data, if you will, from continuous processing, just hordes and hordes and hordes of data. And anyone on the call that's a process engineer has spent a lot of time retroactively looking at process data, understanding what happened. And you can see all those things are in the past tense. But if you could in real time be able to understand what is happening so that you can make changes to optimize or prevent incidents or improve your operations, imagine how important and valuable that will be. And it's a process engineer's dream. The company and The one thing I would say about the company that I think is interesting is when we made our initial investment in them, we always go and see the team, because you're investing in a team, which in a company, so you're investing in a team, so you're investing in people. And so we always wanted to meet them. We meet the CEO, but you want to meet the whole team, the team, depending on the size, you want to meet the board. And Seek was a virtual company long before COVID, and they didn't have a headquarters. And so the team's kind of approach to investment was like, well, where do we go? And so we actually had what looks like a Zoom call with them. It was some proprietary technology on there, it's not Zoom, but it was for me, the first time we'd ever really met with a company that they were all remote and they had learned how to work together. Now you flash forward to COVID times. I will tell you the Seek team didn't lose a beat when we went virtual with COVID, because that's the way the whole company had been designed. So those are a couple of examples. There's many more, obviously, that and they're all a different story. And we have a model by which we select them, we help them grow, we support them over time, and sometimes they, like with ChargePoint, they graduate and go away, in that case onto the public markets.
Yeah, and I think that what you're talking about in a way sort of addresses another question. Amy BS in 2002 chemistry and geochemistry page ask, and you sort of are beginning to answer it. How can we better demonstrate that energy companies are the ones investing in non-hydrocarbon energy sources and are best situated to upscale them? To a certain extent, you're sort of answering that, right?
It's a really important question. Is it Amy? Sandra, Amy. So, we live in a world where people want to say we versus they. You're part of the solution, you're the problem. And the fact of the matter is, the energy system is a system. It has scale, it has complexity. My personal take is that if you're an incumbent and you don't want to change, well, that's one thing. If you're an incumbent and you're looking to the future of how you can improve both the overall energy system and your position in it, and you have the capabilities, the resources to do that, why would the world not want you to be part of that? I think the opportunity, and what we have spent a lot of time on, is how do we get the new players and the incumbents to work together? It's not natural. We're a very large established company, and I'm working with companies that are frequently, in fact, some of them are Caltech graduates, which I always like to see. But they can start out with just a couple of people and grow. And so big and small don't always work together. And that's what we've spent time figuring out how to support them. And if they are successful, then there will be value add for us.
Yeah, and I think that question is sort of echoed by Amy Kelly, who's a frontline leader at Shell with her BS at Caltech and PhD from MIT, another school that we won't mention. And I think that she also expresses frustration about seeing students turn against energy companies, and just expressing that wish that energy companies are known as ones investing in hydrocarbon energy sources and are upscaling them. So I think that it's an important topic.
Yeah, and Sandra, when I get asked that question, by the way, I'm Chevron's executive sponsor at MIT, so it's a pretty good school. I tell students, hey, listen, before we start talking about companies and stuff, let's talk about energy. And I try to impress upon them the challenge, the excitement, and the importance of working in energy. And then whether you work for an incumbent or a new company, there's pros and cons in both of them. And I can't tell you about the pros and cons of being inside a startup, but there's plenty that you should go and visit. But I can tell you what it's like to work for an incumbent. And so you make your choice, because there are pros and cons there. And if you want to work for an incumbent, I'm going to sell you on why Chevron. And if you want to work for a startup, well, I work for Chevron Technology Ventures, and we'll work with you in a different way. But I think you have to start with, what problems do you want to work on in this world? And then, my view is collaboration is the answer. And so there's different ways you can collaborate depending on where you are in the system.
Great answer. And I think that in terms of talking to the next generation, there are two kind of somewhat related questions. What if you ever hit a felt you were hitting a glass ceiling, being a woman in the energy industry, and how did you get around that? And also Purvi is a current student in 2025, an undergraduate, who is asking, what is your advice for women considering a career in the energy industry? So those are both kind of related questions.
Yeah.
There.
So I think I've answered the question about the energy industry, and my message wasn't about gender, and quite honestly, that would be the same message for for women in the energy industry. I will say, we're not where we are, where we need to be from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint. If you go to the incumbent companies, if you go to the companies that we've invested in, we talk about where does that fit in your priorities, and how can you help to change it. And so that comes back to, so did I ever hit a glass ceiling? Probably every once in a while I still do. And I think how I've overcome it and how we have to continue to work on it is the preconceptions, and they're both other people's as well as mine, and continue to work so that everyone is accepted for who they are. And once you're accepted for who you are, then you can be accepted for what you are and what you can do and what you can accomplish and contribute. If you're still stuck on who you are, and you read labels are being put on you, it's harder then for people to see what you can contribute. I spent a fair amount of time in that in the early days, and some of it was, when I left Caltech and joined Chevron, they changed the memo because it said gentleman at the top. That wasn't my request, but it was something that they did. It was kind of awkward, and what they changed it to was kind of silly, but they were trying to help me. And I think part of it is continuing to have role models. So I always say that the easiest way to get women to move up the ladder is to put women up the ladder, because you look up, and if you don't see anybody that looks like you, then what are the odds that you think you will be successful? And it's one of the reasons that I will be a big champion for women to come into this industry, is that I know how important it is to look up and see people that look like you. And I would say that is the case of people of color. It is the people of different nationalities. It is people of different orientations and identities. So, I think making sure that it is inclusive, and so that we really do accept people for who they are, and we really look at their contributions. It's not a complete story. It's not finished. I'll keep working on it. I know for me personally, but I also work for a company that continues to work on it. And I'll finish with that about, what's the business case for it? It's a war on talent, right? It's a war for talent. And so we want to get the best people. And so creating an inclusive environment is one of those selling points for being able to hire the best you have, and the best there is.
Well, thinking forward, maybe here's another quick one, which takes you into the past. Molly McFadden, good to see you again. She says, what part of your early work at Chevron, for those transitioning, what part of your early work at Chevron did you feel your doctoral studies least prepared you for?
Oh, yeah, so that's a really good question.
It is.
So I'll make one admission about Caltech, and maybe I'll come back for another few years. I did very little outside the chemistry department. So the chemistry department helped me in many ways, but there was so much else going on, and I put blinders up. And so, I think that's the one thing I would say about graduate students is make sure you take them down occasionally and see the broader picture. And I didn't do enough of that. I didn't have the language, the tools, and the insights on the financial side and the business side when I first came to Caltech. I had the interest, but I hadn't been schooled in that. I went back to Berkeley and got an MBA. And they also gave me the confidence that I knew how to look at different business models and so forth. So, you know, I didn't get that from Caltech. And I guess the last thing is, you know, I mentioned that I really like pitching and stuff. There weren't as many opportunities when I was at Caltech to stand up and talk about what you did in a way that non-scientists could appreciate. And because we were around scientists all the time. And the work I do, I have to talk to people of all kinds of disciplines and stuff. And so I don't know if that's changed at Caltech, but if you are interested in going into business, if you're interested in starting a business, you will talk to people that didn't go to Caltech. You will talk to people that are not scientifically trained, although they are very smart. And so you have to learn some different languages. So I think those are some of the things that my PhD probably didn't help me with, or I had a few gaps that I had to continue to fill in once I started my working career.
And last question for you, it's sort of a lovely one. It's from Dankai Liu at JPL. Dr. Berger, you are very successful and have accomplished a lot, as we all know. What is your next step in your career and why? To end.
Okay, so that's a great question. Did anybody from Chevron ask you to ask it? So
JPL.
So here's the thing. I'm going to graduate at some point with Chevron. And I say it that way. That's the way we refer to it in my organization. And I look forward to that day. And just like every graduation is a little bittersweet in that, you know, I will have had a fantastic career, but there are new challenges ahead. There are so many problems in this world that I want to work on. I've been working on a number of them, not just the ones that Chevron has given me. And, you know, at some point soon, I will no longer have time to devote myself so much to Chevron. And, you know, we talked about education, we talked about inclusive, we talked about the energy transition. These are all things that will go on after I leave Chevron. So at some point, I will graduate from being an employee, and I look forward to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barbara Berger. It's been a fascinating and inspiring conversation with you today. Thanks so much for your time, and good luck on your next journey.
Thank you.
So, and this concludes our conversation with our distinguished alumna today, Dr. Barbara Berger. Stay tuned. On November 15th, there'll be a conversation with distinguished alumna President Lori Leshin, and on December 1st with Dr. Charles Elachi. So stay tuned for that. I've been your host, Sandra Tsing Loh, Caltech BS 83. And until we see you at next lunchtime, remember, according to Caltech, the truth shall make you free. Thank you.